I don't know what it is, but it's something about defeating a boss in a game that just feels different. It's not just a sense of relief, it's not just a sense of progression, but it can be a sense that it's something that's very personal. And when you overcome something, I think that just further bolsters that personal attachment you have to defeating that boss. And it's like you didn't just defeat an enemy, it's like you defeated something that was truly hindering you from becoming something greater and moving forward. And as I came to realize this, the same inquiry also arose, which was, why do these boss fights feel so much more deeper than they should? Now, one reason to that could probably be the fact that I think bosses represent obstacles, not really just enemies, like I said in the intro to this video. And I think that regular enemies could be seen as just ordinary obstacles, whereas bosses can be seen as barriers, actual things that prevent you entry into certain things. You know, like in life, maybe some girl going to the club, some guy trying to get into business or entrepreneurship. There's always some barrier to entry. As a girl, your barrier to entry to get into that club is relatively nothing. Just be a girl. As a guy, though, your barrier to entry is getting into, let's say, that club. You have to pay money. And it's sort of the same thing when it comes to bosses and normal enemy dynamics in a video game. Those ordinary enemies that you're facing, there's no barrier really. It's an obstacle, it's a hindrance, it's something that's in your way, but it's not really a barrier like a boss is. That barrier to entry is to that barrier of entry to greater success and more power and renown in that video game's world is for you to defeat that boss. And I think that's why it's such a personal attachment to it. And when you look at a boss, it's that they halt your progress entirely. You're fighting Millennia, you're fighting any Dark Souls boss, any Souls boss, you're fighting any boss in the game, you're playing God of War, you're fighting Baldur. They literally stop you from progressing the story and progressing your character's progression. And you must overcome that to move forward. This creates tension, this creates pressure, this creates focus, which is important for completing a video game and more importantly, completing a task in life. And I think the key premise of all of that is a boss isn't just in your way, it is the way. Additionally, repetition builds emotional weight. You don't fight a boss once, you fight them over and over. You learn patterns, you learn routines, you fail repeatedly. I think this is why it's so potent to play games that are created from software or from people who make Souls likes or people who are known for making games with hard bosses and hard encounters, because it cultivates that focus that I was telling you about. And you fighting them over and over, you not only get better at that game, you're learning how to predict patterns, you're learning how to facilitate certain interactions, you're learning how to expect and sort of how to predict what reactions you're going to do in response to what they did. So for example, you're playing the game and a boss does some sort of move. You know that move is coming because you've lost to this boss 50 times already, and you already know what you're going to do in response to that after they make that move. Maybe you're saving a special attack, maybe you're saving a certain weapon, maybe you're saving some sort of large bomb or some sort of magnifying technique. But the point being is that when you go against these bosses and you go against and you face this adversity in the game, it develops and it nurtures far more traits and things needed for not only gaming but life than you care to admit simply by just encountering a boss. And I think each death is sort of adds frustration, determination, but also familiarity, like I said, because as you become more familiar, you learn to predict things and then you become better at the game overall. The boss becomes recognizable, predictable, and more importantly, personal. So in summation, the more you fail, the more the fight starts to matter. I think another factor that should be considered is that you start projecting you start projecting meaning onto the boss. And what I mean by that is that at first it's just a fight. You know, this is just someone I need to beat, somebody I need to get past. I'm trying to level up. I want to further the story. I want to see what happens next. I need to beat you. That's what it starts off as initially. And then over time, it sort of morphs and transcends into something more. You start thinking, this boss is unfair. This boss is testing me. This boss is holding me back. This boss becomes a symbol. So if you're someone who's repeatedly failing, that boss who has now become a symbol, you view that as a representation, an outward manifestation of your failure. Every time you look at the boss, I can't progress the story, I can't beat you, I can't get stronger, I have to go around you, I have to find out workarounds, I have to try to go to talk to this person to get this power up, I have to do this. That boss becomes synonymous with struggle and failure and frustration. And that in turn sort of festers within you and motivate you to try to beat it and to get better and to come back and to fight that boss. This is why you'll see a lot of people who take breaks and they'll come back just so they can potentially beat that boss, because that boss is symbolic of the struggle that they're currently going through in that game. We don't just fight bosses, we assign them meaning, and that meaning can define our overall experience while we're playing that game. Truth be told, when you're fighting these bosses, it kind of feels like a test of you as a person, not really just the character that you're controlling. The stats matter, the gear and the equipment you're using, that matters, but your skill probably seems to matter a little more. You see what I'm saying? Because if you're constantly losing to a boss, you're like, well, am I good at this game? And more precisely, when I say your skill, that can mean your timing, your patience, your adaptation. As I said, the pattern recognition, you being able to maneuver and react to that boss in different ways. And when you lose, it feels like you failed, like you didn't progress, like this is truly something that is going to prevent you from ascending. But when you win, it has the opposite effect. It feels like you improved, like you're someone who is of consequence now, or that you have bolstered that consequence that you already have. The boss isn't just testing your character, it's testing you. I think the build-up leading up to that boss fight is almost as important as the boss fight itself, because before the fight, you know, there's music, there's the arena, there's the cutscene. I love the scene when you're fighting against Mesmer. You hear the choir and the chorus in the back, that solemn, that grim, that daunting sound, like, oh my god, this is the mascot essentially of Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm about to fight him. And you kind of knowing already that at some point you're going to encounter him. And then when you finally get to Shadowkeep, I remember when I was playing Elden Ring, each part of the DLC that I would progress to, I would consider, okay, is this where Mesmer is? Is this where Mesmer is? Is this where Mesmer is? Granted, not everyone is going to have that same feeling of anticipation with just a Souls boss. It could be with any boss, but for my situation in particular, that gave it more meaning, because that anticipation and that pre-boss fight phase is almost as important as the boss fight itself. And everything kind of has a signal. It signals that this matters. During the fight, you're stressed, you're focused, there's pressure, but after the win, there's this sort of silence, there's relief, and then more importantly, for a lot of people especially, there's rewards, new gears, new power-ups, what may have you, whatever. And due to these different phases that you go through, the pre-boss battle, the boss battle itself, and then the post-boss battle, after the boss battle phase, you sort of go through these emotional arcs. It goes from tension to struggle to release. Boss fights are designed as emotional experiences, not just gameplay. As I referenced earlier, bosses can be symbolic of things that are within that game, or even things in your personal lives that you're going through that have been extrapolated onto a screen being controlled by a controller. So these different symbols that they can be representative of, that could be an authority figure, that can be gods or God, depending on what you believe in. That could be your inner demons, that could be trauma, that could be anything really. Some examples of this could be, take in a Souls game, you know, there are gods, there's decay, there are different cycles in Ghost of Tsushima that can be symbolic of honor, be symbolic of survival, of principle, of your own belief system. In a game like God of War, it could be symbolic of fatherhood or of legacy. And these fights feel personal because they represent real human struggles and real human interactions and things that we go through every day. So when you say that something is symbolic, when a video game and a boss is symbolic, I think an important thing to remember is that sometimes you're not fighting the boss, you're fighting what it stands for. Now, as I've been saying, these fights feel real because they're indicative of things that we go through. They mirror something that is actually happening, something that's something that's actually tangible. In life, we face obstacles, we fail, we try again, ideally. But unlike games, there's no health bar, there's no progress meter, there's no clear pattern, there's no guaranteed win or guaranteed result that's going to work out in our favor. So these games, they sort of give us a version of struggle that we can understand, something that can be measured, so to speak, whereas in real life you don't have that. And maybe that's why beating a boss feels so good and so powerful, because there's this sort of predetermination factor towards it. You know, you read the synopsis of the game, you see the trailers, you see the story trailers, you see all the promotion and the marketing. Maybe that plays a factor in as well. And I think it's because that it's controlled, it ends, and that it's fair eventually, where we feel so strong and it resonates deeply with us, and that's why we feel so powerful. It's not just defeating the boss, but it's more so about proving to yourself that you actually can win and beat the boss. Boss fights aren't just harder enemies. They're really moments designed to challenge you, to frustrate you, to push you, and when you finally win, it doesn't feel like just progress, it feels personal. I'm Harlem. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.